Good morning, those that have dialed into the PD Active Virtual Speaker Forum. It is 10:31 right now. We are ready on our end, but we're going to stall for another few minutes while folks get connected. We've got well over 200 registrants today, so it will take a little while for some folks to get connected. So hang tight. We'll be right back with you. Okay, let's get started. It is 10:33. We've just tipped over 100 attendees, and I expect that number to be growing over the next few minutes as I roll through a bit of an introduction here. So good morning and welcome to PD Active's 9th Virtual Speaker Forum. My name is Todd Morrish, and along with Monique Buffler, whom you see on the screen there. Monique, say hi. We will be your hosts and moderators this morning. So before we introduce our speaker, just a little bit of housekeeping. First, the PD Active Board and the PD Active Disparity Committee welcome your input and involvement in ways that will help increase the diversity of PD Active and help address the healthcare disparities for people of color with PD. In short, we want to connect people of color struggling with PD to the many wonderful programs, classes, and events that PD Active offers. You can help us by connecting us to people you may know at community health centers and other community-based health programs in Alameda County. If you have any expertise in this field of work, let us know so that we may tap into your knowledge. Please send an email to this address to express your interest, and that address is administrator@pdactive.org. And I think Monique will be able to paste that into the Zoom chat window for you all, along with a few more helpful links that we'll be referring to shortly. Next, and speaking of those wonderful PD Active programs and classes, we always like to take a moment here to cross-promote those. Besides PD Active's renowned support groups, we also offer Tai Chi and yoga and Pilates and meditation, and there's voice and singing and boxing and dance, and the list is very long, really. If you have tried one or more of these, we ask you to please tag a friend or family member to join you on your next session. Please check out the calendar link on the pdactive.org website. We'll paste that URL into the Zoom chat tool now as well, but you'll find it on the top right corner of the pdactive.org website. An important note, this webinar is being recorded right now, so thank you in advance to Dr. Mathur for allowing us to do that. Finally, PD Active depends on donations to bring events like this to our members free of charge, and we remain grateful for your contributions. If you have not yet had a chance to make the suggested registration donation of $10 for the speaker forum, we will paste that link into the chat feature now also part of the pdactive.org site with a big green donate button. Okay, here we go. Every year in our annual member survey, PD Active asks its members, among many other things, what topics they want to learn more about in our speaker forums and our roundtables. We often ask this question in our support groups as well. We hear lots of requests for information around the hard science of PD, DBS, dyskinesia, medications, gait, etc. And we've covered many of these topics, and we will continue to cover them as the science and research evolve. But recently, we have also heard requests for how to cope in positive terms with our shared challenge. Specifically, and some of you may recognize your own words here, quote, how to apply what we learn, guest interviews of people living well with PD. How perfect is that? Another quote, how people are improving, what are they doing to help themselves? Guess I want positive topics, unquote. And the last one, how others are living well with PD, tips from people with Parkinson's that are doing well. And many more like that. That's just 3 out of about 20 such requests for positivity around this shared challenge of ours. So PD Active is thrilled to have joining us today Dr. Soania Mathur. She's allowed us to call her Sonia for the presentation, which is so much nicer. Dr. Mathur's CV is impressive. It ranges from co-chair of the Michael J. Fox Foundation for Parkinson's Research, board member of the Davis Phinney Foundation, medical advisory board of Parkinson's Canada, and on and on and on. I listed a bunch of those bullet points in the registration page of Zoom. So if you want more, go there or go to her website, which we'll list in a minute here. But even more impressive to me is her own PD story. We'll let her tell you that story in a moment. Today, we will walk through a few of Dr. Mathur's or Sonia's PowerPoint slides. Then later, we will take a brief click through of her excellent website, Unshakable MD. But really what we want to focus the majority of our 90 minutes on this morning is answering and discussing questions you have for the doctor. So please submit your questions via Zoom's Q&A feature. And by the way, questions were already flowing in before we even started the session here. Monique and I will use Zoom's chat tool to deliver information to you, but we want you to use the Q&A feature, which is there in the bottom tool tray on your Zoom screen, to submit questions to us. And we will try to pick those off one by one, probably in the flow of the conversation with Sonia. So Sonia, welcome. And I'm sure I speak for all of us here in thanking you for taking time out of your weekend to speak to our community today.
Oh, no problem. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So I'll hand the figurative mic over to you now. Why don't you start by telling folks your PD story, then we'll walk through your PowerPoint presentation and then later your website.
Sure.
Take it away.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Todd, for that very kind introduction. I appreciate it. So my story is probably not dissimilar to a number of people that are listening, except that mine started quite early. I was 27 at the time I started experiencing a tremor in my right pinky finger. And at first it was easy enough to ignore. I had just finished my residency in family medicine, so I was busy in that, and all good doctors ignore their own symptoms. And I was also expecting my first child, so I was a bit distracted with that as well. But this, intermittent tremor in my pinky finger soon grew more consistent and more steady, and it was kind of occupying most of my hand by that point. And my husband, who's also a physician, said, you know what, this is not normal. You have to go get it checked out. And I thought begrudgingly, okay, I will. And as I walked into the room of a colleague of mine, he didn't take very long. And that's the unusual part about it, actually, because often diagnoses take longer for a lot of people. But he put me through the nose and the walking and everything else, and then said, you have young onset Parkinson's disease. And that was at the age of 27. So that's kind of where the story starts. So I'm now, I'll give away my age here, I don't mind. I'm now 24 years into this disease, and I don't practice in clinical medicine anymore, but I've sort of devoted myself to this life of PD advocacy and education, because I really truly believe that we need to come together as a community and understand that there are things that we can do to live well with this disease, or try and optimize our quality of life. And that's where this PowerPoint came from. So Todd, do you want to put that up? So that's me in Machu Picchu a few years ago, which is a lot of fun. Where do I stand right now? I live outside of Toronto in Canada. I have now 3 lovely daughters and married to the same wonderful guy. And I couldn't have imagined 24 years ago having received a diagnosis like that. I didn't know what to expect for the future. I could not have imagined my life to be as productive as it is now, but everyone's journey is different. But I think there's some fundamental mindsets or fundamental ways of looking at our disease that we can share despite our age or stage of life. And the first one, and this is actually the hardest lesson that I had to learn, is acceptance. Acceptance is paramount. Now, I spent the better part of a decade after my diagnosis in fear and denial. A lot of emotional and physical turmoil. I was angry at my disease and fearful of what the future held. And with no regard for how inconvenient it was for me at that time, it was there, progressing relentlessly. It wasn't welcomed at all. But eventually I got to the point where I was tired of the person I was becoming. I didn't feel joy anymore. I was so concentrated on the glass being half empty that I really wasn't experiencing the joy that I should have had in my life with the young family and a new burgeoning career and that sort of thing. So acceptance was the first step in me facing this battle. And that doesn't mean simply, I know I have the illness. I knew I had Parkinson's disease. Based on my medical knowledge, I could understand what my medical options were, treatment, et cetera, et cetera. But it truly took an extraordinary amount of time before I actually accepted it to be part of me. Now, don't misunderstand what I'm saying. I'm not talking about the type of acceptance that has you laying down in defeat. I'm talking about the type of acceptance that leads to action, that allows us to move beyond our diagnosis, to put this disease into perspective, so that we can learn to live better with the challenges, so that we can focus on not just living, but thriving as well as we can to optimize our quality of life despite this diagnosis. Because that denial that I mentioned I had for a good decade following my diagnosis was really preventing me from recognizing this powerful ability that I had, and we all have, in how I was going to choose to deal with this diagnosis. So that acceptance piece was really, Todd and Monique, really important for me to come to terms with as the first lesson.
Sure. And that you mentioned the earlier hurdles of bitterness and denial and the like. I'm sure an emotional acceptance with a bias toward action means clearing those as soon as possible. So if you have any sort of ideas for how people can work more efficiently through the hard hurdles for early.
Yeah, I was not a very good example of that. Like I said, it took me about 10 years to come to that emotional acceptance, enough that I could really start to concentrate on what my quality of life had to be. But I mean, and I'll go through in some of the other lessons that will be helpful in terms of ways to sort of frame it in your mind. But we really do have, and maybe we go on, because lesson 2 is all about that. Optimism is a choice.
Good, carry on.
And so I really like, there's a quote by Viktor Frankl. He was an Austrian psychiatrist and neurologist at the time of World War II. And his quote rings very true to me. He said, where is it? Everything can be taken from a man, but the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. And he wrote a very popular publication called Man's Search for Meaning. Now, his work was based on experience as a Holocaust survivor. He survived not 1, but 3 concentration camps. And he was, during those years in the concentration camps, that he noticed that people that had hope or some goal that they wished to attain were less likely to succumb in spirit to the brutalization they were subjected to, compared to those that had no hope, that had lost their hope. Now, I would not, even begin to suggest that my journey has any, can be likened to the atrocities of what he lived through. That's unimaginable. But the premise of saying yes to life despite everything, can really be extrapolated to most situations in life, and certainly applicable to our challenge that we face with chronic disease. And as I mentioned, in terms of the early stages that I was dealing with the disease, I began to understand that in reality, I had been choosing to be internally fearful and pessimistic. And I recognized this approach wasn't working. And it wasn't based on one conversation. It was more of a slow kind of internal conversation with myself, a slow realization, a natural evolution, a necessary change. But that it's a really powerful life lesson, that your ability to choose your response to any challenge, including a diagnosis of Parkinson's disease and the obstacle it brings, the power to choose optimism over despair. Because it's you have no control over your diagnosis, but you can really determine how you're going to face the challenges that this disease brings. And that moves you from that position of helplessness to one of power in terms of determining your life experience.
Mm-hmm. Good. Carry on. We've got some questions coming in here that we'll try to match up with some of your lessons, but carry on.
Sure. So I mentioned before that, if you accept, as I found, truly accept the diagnosis, emotionally come to terms with it. And this doesn't mean that it happens once. I mean, I've been at this for 24 years. So at different flag points during my journey, I've had to calibrate, I guess, in some ways, because the challenges do become, more progressive and the disability does become more apparent in terms of your daily life. But that's why it's all about quality of life. Unfortunately, we don't have a cure for Parkinson's disease. It's been around, it was first described 200 years ago, but we're still, not there in terms of having a cure. There's nothing on the immediate horizon. I'm not saying that there won't be. I think there will be a cure for Parkinson's disease, but until then, it's really all about quality of life. And that's really important to understand. Just because we don't have a cure doesn't mean we can't learn to live better with this disease or live well with this disease. Now, I'll have to make a confession on behalf of a lot of physicians. I think we've all been guilty of this at some point in our careers. And sometimes physicians will fall into the trap of treating symptoms instead of the patient. So yes, it's a positive result if I give you some more medication to help with your tremor. But it's actually a successful outcome if I give you that medication and you have side effects that are worse than your tremor? Or is it actually successful if I treat your tremor, but really what's bothering you is depression? I don't think so. And I feel like the medicine is moving more to being patient-centric and taking the whole patient experience into consideration when making these management decisions. I think that's changing, but it really falls on our shoulders as patients to describe what our quality of life is and what our quality of life goals are, because that'll differ from person to person. For some people, getting back to running marathons is what their quality of life goal is. For others, it may be just getting to the bottom of the driveway to pick up their mail or being able to walk their dog around the neighborhood. Both are very, very important. Both are equally important, but they're both very personal to the person experiencing it. The reason I say quality of life is so important to communicate to your medical team is because they don't know. Parkinson's disease is unlike other diseases in that we don't have a biomarker for it. So a biomarker would be something like a blood pressure reading that you can gauge the severity of someone's blood pressure health based on a reading, or sugar levels, that people make management decisions based on sugar levels in terms of people with diabetes. We don't have that in Parkinson's disease. So your medical team is really going to depend on you telling them what your quality of life goals are, how your life experience is being affected in order to make management decisions that are good for you. So the quality of life, as I said, is something that until we find a cure, we need to, as physicians and as patients, concentrate on improving our daily existence, our productivity, our interpersonal relationships. It really, really does come down to quality of life.
Yeah, and would you agree that it might be a good idea for us as patients, people with Parkinson's, to maybe document what some of those goals are that define our quality of life or our ideal quality of life? And admittedly, those probably adjust, right? They may need to adjust downward as your disease progresses, or if you get better at walking or whatever your goal is, or going
Exactly.
to the with the mail, maybe your goal goes up a little bit. So documenting
Exactly.
that.
Yeah, very much so, Todd. I agree. Like it's an ongoing thing. It's not a static thing. So it depends. It varies from person to person. It varies within the same person depending on what stage they're at. So these quality of life goals have to be evaluated and reevaluated.
Sure.
I think an important point that you made is communicating those to your doctor. It definitely seems like that is something that's not, I mean, there are quality of life measures. I know that some doctors utilize, but the more important aspect of it seems to be the conversation with your doctor.
Absolutely.
And so if somebody isn't sure about how to navigate that, do you have any sort of tips for sort of dipping your toes into the water with those conversations? I mean, I think probably more healthcare providers are open to those conversations, but given, healthcare, as we have it right now, when doctors' time is so limited, they're not always open to those conversations.
Yeah, I agree things are changing, Monique, but you're right in terms of time limitations, which most physicians work under. I think I agree with Todd. I think writing down the top 3 things that are bothering you the most and making sure that those things are addressed by the movement disorder specialist before you leave the office is really important. Because like I said, they're not going to know. I mean, for instance, my needs or my treatment regimen is going to differ from somebody else, say, who's 20 or 30 years older than I am and living alone, right? Or somebody might be dealing with constipation that's really affecting their ability to socialize. And I might be dealing with a tremor that affects my ability to do, fine work, that sort of thing. So everyone has their own quality of life goals. And so your physician isn't going to know any of that unless you communicate it. And I think organizing your appointments in order to address, say, the top 3 things that you really feel are affecting your life experience is a good idea to do.
Sonia, we've got a question that comes in since one of the goals of our quality of life is probably going to be around exercise. Anita asks, is it okay to push physical activity to exhaustion, or is it unhealthy to push oneself too far? So I guess tempering your goals with a healthy dose of reality is important, right?
Yeah, exercise, I was going to speak about it, but I'll speak about it now. Exercise is the one thing that we can do as patients in order to improve our physical abilities. And that goes for everybody, right? Exercise is good for our hearts, it's good for our lungs, it's good for our brains, it's good for our bones, but it also has definite improvement in Parkinson symptoms or impact in Parkinson symptoms in terms of your flexibility, in terms of your energy level, in terms of your mood. So there are very PD specific benefits for exercise. Now, I always caution people, you should do some sort of exercise, but it also depends on your other health conditions. That's a family physician and me coming out. You want to take into consideration your heart health and your lung health and that sort of thing before you go full blown into some exercise routine. You want to work with people maybe to set a routine that is specific to Parkinson's patients, because sometimes you'll have issues with balance, for instance, or you might have, issues with, not being able to use certain equipment because of the tremor and that sort of thing. So having somebody that really understands Parkinson's would be good. And sometimes that might not be in your community, but you can access those resources online. I have a love-hate relationship with exercise. I mean, I think as do a lot of people. I know it's good for me and I do it, but a lot of time it's begrudgingly. But I know that if I don't do it, I'm gonna not feel as well. So I force myself in terms of getting that done. But that's where, if there's things that you enjoy, like the studies aren't out in terms of an exercise prescription per se. There's a lot of studies that show forced exercise at such and such percentage of your upper limit of heart rate is important and that sort of thing. Until those studies come out, I always tell people, do what you enjoy. The important thing is to keep moving in some way, shape, or form that's safe for you. So it can be dancing, it can be, walking, it can be running a marathon, it could be chair exercises, it could be any number of things, anything that will keep you moving. And try and work in some strength training and flexibility training, as well as cardio or mobility issues, addressing those issues, because I think that's really important. So I don't know if I would recommend necessarily going to the point of exhaustion as the question said, but I think it's important to keep moving.
Yeah, I suppose if we individually understand what that point of exhaustion is and can identify as we're getting close to it, but stop shy of it, that's probably an ideal. I mean, I'm no doctor, but that's what I do with my walks anyway. I don't really want to get to the point of exhaustion because I'd like to enjoy the rest of my day.
Exactly.
But I do know that I need to push my envelope as much as I can, just shy of that point.
Yes.
Anyway, okay, so we've sort of segued nicely with talking about, documenting our quality of life goals and then talking to our doctor. We segued into lesson 4.
Lesson 4 is build your support team. We have to remember we're not islands unto ourselves, right? We do best when we're surrounded by a strong support network made up of caring individuals, all who are working to optimize our quality of life or help us to live better with this disease. And for everybody, that Parkinson's management team or support team is going to be different. It will often and should include your family physician or medical professional, someone who's managing your general health, because although we have Parkinson's disease, we're not immune to that doesn't make us immune to other sort of normal diseases that may come our way or may challenge us as well. Then we have our Parkinson's care physician, and sometimes that is your primary care physician if you live in a rural area, which is fine. And if you live in a more urban area, it could be a neurologist, ideally a movement disorder specialist, but that's not always accessible to everybody. Then it'll be variable in terms of who sits on your team. It can be a physiotherapist. They really do well to help you develop, maintain, and restore the maximum movements and function that you can have. A massage therapist in terms of muscle spasm and working through those trigger points. Occupational therapists, particularly if you're having issues in the realms of work and leisure and activities like of daily living, like personal care, mobility, housekeeping, caregiving, they can be very helpful in that. Dietitians, people with Parkinson's disease are susceptible to weight loss and malnutrition, often due to the increased energy burned, like I am right now, through involuntary movements. And medication side effects can sometimes also limit food intake. There's support groups, professional counseling. I mean, regardless who makes up your team, the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, I mean, whoever it is, the important thing is always to remember that only you know what your quality of life goals are, like we talked about, and it's up to you to put together a team that will help you reach those goals.
So again, another good reason to document your quality of life goals, because you can share it with not just your primary provider, but the whole team.
Right, exactly.
Good.
And that leads into lesson 5, actually.
Good.
You must be an active participant.
Right.
Because you really must be an active participant in order to live well with this disease. Mm-hmm. Being a passive bystander and sort of letting this disease happen to you will really not optimize your life experience. It can take physical commitment or it can take emotional commitment to overcome certain hurdles. I mean, basically, you want to take control over those variables that you have control over. I mean, I don't have control over my diagnosis, but or symptoms a lot of the time, but I do have control over certain aspects of my life that if I optimize them, they can really improve my life experience. So lifestyle changes such as reducing stress, maximizing your health in general through diet and exercise, proper sleep, what I call extreme self-care. I think that's really important, to develop a routine that optimizes your physical, emotional, and spiritual health, and recognize that people with Parkinson's disease adhering to a schedule like that, whether it's medication or self-care, is really vital. And so you need to be proactive when it comes to that, of following with your medical appointments, taking medications on time. Building that routine into your everyday commitment is really important. And that's easier said than done. I know, I understand, because apathy can also be a real problem with Parkinson's disease. But you'll find if you're able to make those changes and they become habit for you, then you will feel the difference in terms of when you skip a day, for instance, which I do fairly frequently. You will notice the difference between being on a routine versus not being on a routine.
Okay. I'll keep driving forward here.
Okay. Lesson 6, education is key. You don't have to have an MD in order to live well with Parkinson's disease. That's first. And in your battle with Parkinson's disease, knowledge is power. Attitude is everything, but knowledge is power. And when I say education, I'm talking about how this disease is affecting you. Because one saying there is that when you meet one person with Parkinson's, you've met one person with Parkinson's disease, meaning everyone has their own unique way that they sort of have their symptoms, their response to treatment, their complications, their prognosis, their sort of journey with this disease is going to differ from person to person. So in order to communicate effectively with your team, either when it comes to medical management, you have to be educated in what a motor symptom is versus a non-motor symptom, how your medications affect you personally in terms of effectiveness as well as side effects. Understand the difference between something like bradykinesia versus dystonia versus dyskinesia. Understanding those terms, understanding what medications or treatment options there may be available for you. Educate yourself on research, what research is going on. How can we as a community build stronger research ties with the research community and how that will benefit us all. So education, I think, is really, really important for people to have, because you want to participate in your medical management. You want to participate in your medical decisions that are being suggested to you. You want to have knowledge about that in order to make the proper management decisions for yourself.
Excellent. I'm going to pause for a second just to back up to lesson, so what was it now? Oh, 4, building your support team. Christopher lobs us a quick question saying, how about financial advisor? Would you add that to the part of your team?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Sure.
Yeah, because that's going to contribute to your quality of life, right?
Yeah.
Financial advice, lawyers sometimes are necessary. Counseling, as I mentioned, is some speech and language pathology can be very much an integral part of your team because of swallowing difficulties that you can sometimes get.
Yeah, sure.
So, yeah.
Okay, I think we're on 7.
So 7 is focus on your abilities. Focusing on your abilities and not the disabilities that this disease can bring. Focusing on what this disease takes away is actually somewhat of a natural reaction if you think about it, because we're not given a choice in the matter. My husband often used to tell me when I practiced for about 12 years with Parkinson's, and then I had to give that part of my life up simply because I couldn't manage my health as well as the demands of a busy family practice. And he used to say, oh, if I could, do what I'm passionate about and walk away from my job, I would. But the issue there is that, yes, I was doing what I'm passionate about, but I wasn't given a choice in the matter.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't my choice to stop clinical practice, which I really, really enjoyed and still miss. Because when certain things are taken away from you that you feel you should be able to do, it's only natural to feel that life is unfair, because it is unfair. It is unfair, and we have to recognize that. But we also have to focus on our abilities. So, for instance, my hands may be too shaky to play piano, but I still have my musical knowledge. I can still enjoy it and pass it on to my children, for instance. I might not be able to keep up, playing a hard game of tennis anymore, but I can still have fun with my kids on the court, that sort of thing. Focus on those positive attributes and be adaptable. And I think we talked a little bit about that, because each day is unique. When your body will cooperate is going to be unpredictable. And I've had to learn not to get stuck on how things should be done. Certain tasks will require more attention and time, or maybe have to be modified in some way or postponed even to sometimes my symptoms aren't as impactful on my functioning. But focusing on the positive, I think, is a healthy mindset, because I know now that when you focus on only what you've lost, you really lose sight of what remains. And I think that is that really can affect your mood and life experience.
Yeah. I would go so far as to layer another one onto that, Sonia, on focus your abilities and say, find, if you don't have them already, find friends that understand you and enjoy those. You brought up tennis, for example, and I used to love to play pretty competitive, hardcore tennis. I can't really do that anymore, but I found another friend with PD who loves to play tennis, and so we play together.
Right.
So he understands that why it takes me 3 or 4 tosses to get the ball in the right spot to serve it.
Right. Right.
I understand him. So same thing with riding bikes. I've got friends that understand my limitations, and I'm going to be slower than I used to be. But
right.
got good understanding friends, that helps it a lot.
Right. And that's why I think that part of your team really needs to be peers that have PD, because really there's that kind of bond that you create with someone that has gone through the same life experiences that you are going through. And we learn a lot from each other because we're experiencing the disease.
Yeah.
Sonia, I wanted to follow up on your comment about work and how you worked for about 12 years, I think, and then you said you decided to retire. And I think this is a common question that people have, because they're often, at the pinnacle of their careers when they get diagnosed. And, a lot of people would like to continue working and find it, tricky. And we just had a question come in on the chat that says, it feels like everyone with PD retires, and I don't have the financial resources to do that, and I don't want to. So is it unrealistic to expect that I can continue working semi or full time? And I think this is probably a question of great interest to many people on the webinar. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on what you do. And there's nothing to say that you're not capable of continuing on your job. It obviously depends on your employer and the circumstances of support that you can get from them in terms of modifying things if things need to be modified. You have to keep busy. Mentally, that's good for you. And financially, that's important as well, but definitely there's no one right answer to that question because it's so unique for everybody. But what got to the point for me was that I was experiencing rest. I wasn't sleeping at night. My symptoms were getting worse. I was overdosing myself on dopamine just so my hands wouldn't be shaking when I was giving vaccinations or doing physical exams. I was basically running myself into the ground. And so my movement disorder specialist basically said, well, you can walk out of your office or you can crawl out. It's up to you. But one of the two things has to happen. So I had reached the point after 12 years practicing with Parkinson's disease that it wasn't possible for me to do that anymore to that extent. But I certainly kind of pivoted and went in a different direction. So yeah, it depends on your personal situation. I think when you get to the point where you're worried more about when you're not able to look after yourself and do what you need to do in order to live well and feel well with this disease to the best of your ability, or optimizing your quality of life, I think that's when the decision has to be made one way or another. And I feel for people that honestly, it's not an easy thing when it comes to employment. And I wish there was an easy answer, but yeah, it's complicated.
Complicated, and it depends. I agree with you. I mean, if it's a job you're talking about that doesn't bring much stress and you can do with your motor symptoms effectively, then go for it and stay engaged and stay passionate about what you do. If you have a lot of stress in the job, then it's going to add to your non-motor symptoms.
Yes.
And if your motor symptoms get in the way of whiteboarding or typing or things like that,
yeah,
it's more challenging. So it's a depends.
Yeah.
And I think, Carrie's question that Monique had starts with, it seems like a lot of people with PD retire. I think if we ask around, we'd find that a lot of people, even in our own pediatric community, are still working. I don't think it's a majority by any stretch, but maybe we should bring that up in support group and discuss how they're able to do that.
Right. And I think things are changing too. I think that places of employment are now getting to be more flexible in terms of allowing for modifications to be made to your job description compared to, say, 20 years ago when I first was diagnosed, or 24 years ago when I was first diagnosed, where it was very much a hush-hush stigmatized disease.
Yeah, agreed. Okay, what are we on? Lesson 8.
Lesson 8. PD does not define you. So, I mean, we hear this all the time. I'm not defined by my disease, but we really are much more than the label of Parkinson's disease. So think about this for a minute. If we were to ask family, friends, or even strangers on the street to write down words to describe you, do you think that Parkinson's would be the only word scribbled on their paper, or disabled or sick? No, I would challenge you and say no, that would not happen. There would be things like loving spouse, great parent, trustworthy friend, kind stranger, someone with a great sense of humor, someone who's outgoing, who's courageous, a whole myriad of descriptors that are far more accurate in defining who you are and of the roles that you play in the lives of others. So we are much more than that label. We are not defined by our circumstances, our disease, our relationships, or our finances. I mean, we're parents, we're children, we're siblings, we're friends, mentors, we're so much more. And I mean, undoubtedly, we are all shaped by our life experiences, and the challenge of Parkinson's will obviously shape us to some extent, but it's not our only defining factor. That's what I want to say. There's so many aspects of your life experience and your characteristics that make you the person that you are. And parenting is a great reminder of this. I mean, I have 3 girls now. I had all 3 of my girls after my diagnosis. And although they have learned a lot of compassion and charity and from our shared experience with Parkinson's, it doesn't come into play most of the time. I'm their mother. And whether I have the disease or not, they're going to react to me as their mother. And they do help me out in immeasurable ways. But when it comes down to it, that's their view of me. So that they're a great reminder that I'm much more than this disease.
Good. I think for some of us, this would take quite a mind shift, right? I mean, at least early post-diagnosis, when we're sort of in the woe is me, I have PD, negativity trough.
Mm-hmm.
It takes a bit of an effort to lift yourself up and take yourself out of that rut and realize that there's still a lot more going on in your life that defines you than the disease alone.
Right. And we have to allow ourselves to be in that negativity trough. We're only human. And we're going to have bad days, and we're going to have bad weeks, and we're going to have bad months. And that's okay. We have to allow ourselves to do that. It's just a matter of not staying in that mindset.
Part of the journey, right?
Yeah.
Good. Okay.
So the next thing I'd like to talk about is getting involved. And I think we can go to the next slide in a moment. Getting involved. This is an important thing to, once you kind of establish what your own management is going to be, to look beyond, to look to support your peers, support your community, participate in research, for instance. And I've been involved with a lot of different organizations through the years, and still contribute in whatever way I can. But what I was finding was that organizations sort of work in silos to a certain extent. And there wasn't as much collaboration happening, particularly from the research perspective, that I felt would really benefit our cause. So about 18 months ago, myself and 2 other Canadian Parkinson's advocates, Larry Gifford and Tim Haig, started the PD Avengers. And this is a global advocacy group that we put together. Next slide, please. So how did this come about? Well, it started off as a little book club, actually. We're all inspired after reading the book, Ending Parkinson's by Drs. Boss Blom, Michael Oken, Ray Dorsey, and Todd Scherer. And at the end of this book here, are pages of sort of calls to action when they talk about prevention and treatment and access to care and that sort of thing. And we discussed those points and those issues that needed to be tackled we began to ask or wonder who was going to tackle the work that needed to be done. And as I said, we recognize that there's lots of great organizations doing great work, but we're often working in silos. And we realized that unlike other disease groups, if things we left at status quo, we weren't progressing fast enough. I mean, Parkinson's was discovered over 200 years ago, or described over 200 years ago. And since then, humanity's put men on the moon. We've eradicated polio. We've changed HIV from a death sentence to a chronic illness. We've mapped the human genome, and we've discovered, thousands of galaxies. But yet we've really provided precious little beyond that one gold standard medication that all medications are compared to, a 50-year-old drug for Parkinson's disease, and that's dopamine replacement. So despite the unprecedented advances that we've actually made in the areas of medicine and technology, Parkinson's disease remains a source of disability and poor quality of life for millions of people around the world. And so we pulled together a larger group of founding members, including those in the US, Canada, and UK, organized our mission into 3 pillars, which I'll talk about in a moment, and the PD Avengers, a name that was initially a lot tongue-in-cheek, but it ended up sticking. And we came to be in July of, well, it's 18 months ago. Next slide, please. So what makes the PD Avengers unique? First of all, we're patient-led. So taking lessons from other advocacy groups, we looked at the HIV campaign, for instance. We believe it's time to organize ourselves and take action. So we're patient-led. We're here to add urgency to wellness advocacy and research by uniting people and organizations that to help in the cause of ending Parkinson's disease. We're not here to reinvent the wheel. We're here to take the work and campaigns of our organizational partners and expand their reach, amplifying their messages through the power of numbers. And we're about unifying the global community, the global organizational community, in terms of collaboration, and the global patient community as well. And we work under three pillars. If you can go to the next slide. The first pillar is wellness. And we believe that everyone, regardless of where they live, deserves access to care. Okay. And first, everyone in the world should have access to proper medications, treatment, information, and support. And we aim to navigate that and address the stigma and the lack of humane care within some communities and across the globe, which leads to unbearable suffering for many. I can tell you stories of people that have been living in Uganda or Cameroon who have no access to basic dopamine supplementation or dopamine medications. Those people are living, catatonic lives, being shunned by their villages because it's considered witchcraft or they're somehow, suffering from something that is contagious. Like there's extreme lack of care in many parts of this world, and also within communities within our own countries. And that basic access to care is really what we all deserve, and we're trying to work towards that. The second pillar is advocacy, and we hope to, as I said, unite a global group of actively engaged advocates to power forward. And research, we need to support our hardworking research community. They can't do it without us. We can't do it without them. And that means getting patients involved at every aspect of therapeutic development. So that's from defining the direction of research based on the community's needs to being involved with the design of a study so that it's patient-centric and you can increase the enrollment and participation in Parkinson's clinical studies, and also the dissemination of the information afterwards, so that there's not this hope and hype thing that sometimes happens when media picks up on studies, that there's actual realistic conclusions that come from those studies. Next slide, please. So this is our map. It's probably the most updated one we have right now. So as it stands, in the last 18 months, we have about getting close to 5,000 PD Avengers. from 80 countries. We have 83 organizational partners. These are global PD organizations and include actually global Parkinson's organizations, not just here in North America. And the easiest way to join forces with the PD Avengers is just to sign up. And you can sign up on pdavengers.com as an organization or as an individual. One of the sort of tenets of PD Avengers is to think global but act local. I think that's really important because our experience with PD here in North America is not the same as Africa or China or Japan, for instance. And how can we accomplish? It's not about raising money. That's one thing I want to make very clear. We don't fundraise at all. We just ask for your voice and your support and your involvement to whatever degree you feel comfortable. So, and it's not just patients, it's care partners, clinicians, allied health professionals, researcher. If you're involved with pharma, we just want to unite the global community so that we can voice our concerns with one voice and try and amplify everyone's messages so that we can end this disease.
Great. And finally,
lesson 10. And it is what it says. You have to let go of your fear of the future in order to begin living your present. Fear is paralyzing. It's an emotion that sort of keeps you mired in your problems and prevents you from moving forward. Michael J. Fox once said, if you fear the worst and it happens, then you've lived it twice. If it doesn't happen, then you've worried for nothing. And I think that's really important, to take it day by day. And stuff will happen in the future. You don't know what will happen because everyone's unique in terms of the course of their illness. You're going to have Parkinson's for a while until a cure is found, but focus on today. How can I make today better for myself? What can I do? What changes can I make in what I'm doing in order to feel better tomorrow? But focusing on your present, your family, the good things that you have in life, the other roles that you play in life, and sort of try and let go of the fear of the future because it's an unknown and you don't want to worry about it twice.
Yeah, that's a great quote by Michael J. Fox. And a really good way to wrap up the PowerPoint, especially around PD Avengers and Ending Parkinson's, the book that I've probably pitched 20 times now in the last presentations we've made. But those are two great action-oriented ways to wrap up your 10 lessons of tips for dealing with Parkinson's and attacking it positively. PD Avengers is terrific. I should have listed that among your many accolades up top, but it's a great group from what I know of it. I'm not one of your PD Avengers yet, but I will be after this call, I promise.
Oh, good.
Why don't we do this, Monique? Why don't we find a few questions for Sonia from the chat and the Q&A, and then after a few minutes, we might just change gears and kick over into a quick navigation of her website.
Sounds great. Yeah, there's a lot of good questions coming in. I think you're talking about PD Avengers prompted a question on sort of PD organizations. There's a lot of them out there, as you know, and sometimes I think it can be difficult for people to navigate. A lot of them focus on, finding research for a cure for Parkinson's. So I kind of have a twofold question. One is, I know they're still working fast and furious on the cure part, but is there any promising research on diseases or treatments for just slowing the progression of disease, not for curing it necessarily, but for dealing with slowing the progression?
There's a lot of research being done at the moment into what we call disease modifying treatments. Mm-hmm. Those are not necessarily restorative, meaning they won't necessarily give you back function, but they will slow down the course of your progression. There is a lot of research being done in that regard, a lot of advanced therapies such as, gene therapy and stem cell treatment, but we're not there yet. That really is the bottom line. I look at research as sort of being on two parallel train tracks. One is the cure, mm-hmm. and the other is treatment, meaning treatment to optimize how you feel and manage your symptoms without disabling side effects. And cure is probably more the disease modification track. And there is definitely research going on. Are we close to something on the horizon? No, not yet, not yet. But but there are a lot of other treatments that are closer, I think.
So in terms of supporting and, organizations that are working on a cure, there's a lot of them out there. And so one participant asks, is there value in these groups working in parallel? Should I just find my favorite and focus on them?
Yeah, I mean, your hard-earned money needs to be placed where you feel most comfortable. There is a lot of collaboration that's gone on compared to when I was first diagnosed, where people were very territorial over their research. People were, wouldn't share data and that sort of thing. And that's changing. And actually PD Avengers is kind of been a microcosm of that, because we've seen the organizations that normally wouldn't cooperate doing things together and amplifying each other's messages, which I think is really important. I think we all have our favorite program, which we sort of have looked into that we believe in. I think any money that we can give to research is money well spent, because it can take up to $1 billion and over a decade to get something from the lab counter to the pharmacy shelf. So it's not a cheap proposition, and it can't move forward without support for financially. But
thank you so much. Just to circle back to the research around the progression, the disease modifying, is there anything in particular that's exciting you? So what do you think is the most promising thing in the pipeline right now?
I take it back one step, and I look, what's most promising to me is the work that's being done to figure out what causes this disease in the first place, because you can't cure what you don't know. So I think there's a lot more work and understanding that this disease isn't just about dopamine. We used to think it's just lack of dopamine in one part of the brain that causes all of this. No, that's not true. It's involvement of many other neurotransmitters in the brain. And it involves different parts of our body. It's not just a motor disease, as you well know. The non-motor symptoms are sometimes disabling more than the motor. So that increased understanding of what Parkinson's is through the genetic studies that are being done, through the basic science that's being done, I think that to me is more exciting, because as I said, we can take all these shots on goal, but it's better to know what we're dealing with.
Agreed. Adam asks, your 10 tips for living well with PD are good blanket coverage, but Adam asks, would you treat YOPD, young onset Parkinson's, differently than Parkinson's identified later in life with your tips?
Yeah, I mean, I think the attitude is the same. I think the stressors are different. I mean, we share some things in common with our older counterparts, but there are a lot of stressors that we share uniquely. And our disease is often different too. It's often not as quickly progressive, often doesn't deal with as many cognitive issues compared to those that have the disease later in life. But we also have to live with this disease a lot longer in terms of years. So it needs to be treated differently. The stressors are going to be different. You're often, like I think Monique mentioned, at the peak of your career. You're often providing financially for your family. You're often, at a point where life should be all about, your social life and traveling and doing, exciting things like that. So there are different stressors that come along with YOPD. You can't treat them the same. Mm-hmm. But the principles are the same. The principles in terms of optimizing quality of life, which, as I said, differ from person to person. That key factor is still there.
Good.
There's quite a few questions coming in around exhaustion and fatigue, and sort of how people sort of can manage to, balance that with their desire to sort of live a normal, productive life. And I have a feeling this is probably, a pretty common question that you get. Do you have any recommendations for sort of how to handle that, how to balance those?
It's a hard balance. And I'm trying to figure it out myself at the moment. Apathy and fatigue are huge issues for our community, and they seem like really rather benign things, but they affect you globally. They affect everything that you want to do in your day, as well as your productivity, which can be demoralizing at times if you don't have the energy to do things that you normally do. So there's one thing is adjusting your expectations is important to do. It's okay if you can't be running at 100 kilometers an hour like you were, say, 2 years ago. We have to adjust our expectations of ourselves. We're all getting older as well, so that's going to slow us down anyway. So adjusting your expectations, seeing if there are people that can help you achieve what you want to achieve in terms of delegating some responsibilities to others that maybe you took on by yourself at one time, seeing if there's different ways to doing things that you can sort of accommodate your symptoms to a greater extent. And also accountability is a good one, especially when it comes to fatigue and exercise. I found that was the best way, is be accountable to someone. If it's a buddy that, you promised to walk with 5 times a week, or it's a class that, people will call you from the class if you're not there, or, if you have the opportunity to have a personal trainer that knocks on your door twice a week, then that kind of accountability. So relying kind of on external sources of accountability is sometimes a good idea as well. And also making sure you do your extreme self-care, because fatigue often also arises from sleep problems that we inevitably have with Parkinson's disease. So trying to address those factors, which may need to be medically addressed, are also important to keep in mind.
Would you add, the obvious, listen to your body? If you are exhausted at the end of an afternoon or beginning of an afternoon, listen to your body.
Absolutely.
Right?
I think what Todd's saying is it okay to take naps? I think that's
Oh gosh,
to get at.
yes.
I used to be a semi-professional napper, but after PD, I'm a professional napper.
Even without PD, a lot of the world naps, so I don't think it's a bad thing. Yeah, listen to your body. Obviously, you don't want to run yourself into the ground, for sure.
Own it. So with the topic that we've got, which is tips for living well with PD, it's a pretty broad range of questions that we'll get. And here's one that's, if any of these are sort of the ones that you like to punt to a specialist, you should always reserve that right. But Michelle wants to know, have you considered DBS? And if not, why not?
I have considered it. I've actually gone through the evaluation for it a couple of years ago.
So this falls right squarely into the quality of life lesson.
It does, exactly. That's what I tell people to use in terms of their in their decision-making process for DBS. DBS works wonderfully when it works. It can be life-changing for certain people that need it, or at that point where they need it. Because the interesting thing is that DBS helps with certain symptoms, but it also allows people to cut back on their medications, which helps with the side effects that those medications are giving them. So it works in 2 ways, not only stimulating the brain in a certain way, but also allowing you to back off on your oral medications, which is helpful as well. I'm at the point right now where my quality of life, I feel, is fine. It's good with my oral medications at the moment. So I'm not at the point where I feel like I need to take that next step, but if I need to take that next step, I certainly will.
And can you talk a little bit about what your wellness regime is in terms of just diet, supplements, exercise, nutrition? And are there certain things that, have really helped you along the way with the progression of your symptoms, progression of your disease, and managing symptoms?
Sure. Personally, as I mentioned, one thing earlier in the talk was about routine. Routine is extremely important in terms of when you get up, when you sleep, when you exercise, that sort of thing. Routine has been important. Diet-wise, I eat primarily plant-based diet, although I do have fish or seafood. Being a maritimer from the east coast of Canada, that kind of comes with the territory. So that's important. And exercise. I exercise hopefully at least 5 to 6 days a week. And it's not, it's about an hour. I'm kind of go from cardio to some weights or kettlebell or stretching. Yoga is an important part of it as well. I don't, vitamin D, I take vitamin D because in Canada, we're all low on vitamin D. And in Parkinson's, we can be low in vitamin D. I take calcium for my bone health because, again, especially women with Parkinson's disease are prone to osteoporosis as well. And that sort of mental relaxation, I like to work into my routine as much as possible. The busyness of life allows for that. So there's some personal things. There's no real diet that you can say for Parkinson's disease. It doesn't really, it's not a Parkinson's disease diet, but a lot of people talk about the Mediterranean diet, which is going to be rich in your fruits and fruits and vegetables with, say, olive oil and that sort of thing, that typical Mediterranean diet, sort of combined with the diet that we use for hypertension as well. This, it just went out of my mind what it's called, but the diet we use for hypertension, which again, low salt, not any processed foods, or if you eat healthy, that's what you have to do. I don't like saying anyone should be on a really, really strict diet. The only thing you might want to look into is protein, and not eating protein, but when you eat protein, because that can sometimes interfere with the absorption of your dopamine replacement.
Right.
So you have to kind of give it some time if you notice it's affecting your absorption of your medication.
And since we're on the track of your regimen, can you share with us, or are you open to sharing with us your medication regimen?
Yeah, sure, of course. I take a long-acting dopamine replacement. I take Cinemat, and I take amantadine, and I take something for the nausea that I get with Cinemat. Yeah, three times a day usually.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Monique, I'll lob one back out here again real quick, because I've gotten the same email, very sweet, from both husband and wife members of Parkinson's PD Active. It's rather specific, so if you wanted to refer this off to a specialist, we would understand. But what is the prognosis for vascular Parkinsonism in an otherwise healthy 70-plus-year-old female? Any recommendations there for nutrition or sleep disruption?
Before you answer that, maybe you could define for those of us who don't know what vascular Parkinson is.
Parkinsonism is basically a conglomerate of different movement disorders. Vascular Parkinsonism would deal with, it's kind of like if you think of how a stroke can affect your functioning. If you have vascular Parkinsonism, the blood vessels in the brain are not supplying blood as well as they should to certain areas of the brain, and then you get the symptoms of Parkinson's because it affects the brain in that way. Vascular Parkinsonism is a little bit different in that it's not necessarily due to the lack of dopamine that it occurs. So it needs to be treated sometimes a little bit differently. And a lot of that is often to deal with what may have caused the blood vessel issue in the first place, like high blood pressure and high cholesterol and that sort of thing. So diet wise, yeah, I mean, they would have to talk to their own specialist about it, but probably depending on what their cholesterol level is or their blood pressure level is, it would depend on that. It's not very, I can't tell you the incidence. It's not very common, but it's well
I've never heard of
documented.
it, so.
Yeah.
Monique, have you got anything teed up?
Oh yeah, lots of questions. So kind of we went in sort of narrow there, and now I want to kind of step back and ask a bigger question about alternative therapies.
Mm-hmm.
And have you found in your own personal life there's been any particular things that have helped you, like acupuncture or massage or medical cannabis, particularly, here in the Bay Area, there's just sort of a plethora of opportunities to explore these things. And we have had previous forums that have talked specifically about them. So I think our members are fairly aware of what's out there, but we're sort of curious about what, your personal experience has been, if there are things that have worked for you or you would recommend.
Yeah, although, I was trained to be a physician here, in North America, I do believe that we don't know everything, when it comes to treating disease. And so I do think there's a role for alternative therapies to be used in your management. Of course, you want to make sure that you're not doing anything detrimental. So it's always a good idea to check with your physician before you go on like a supplement or something like that you may not know what the effect is. I'm a little bit hesitant about that. Massage, definitely swear by it. I think that it's really helpful in terms of kind of breaking down those kind of fascial stiffness that you get in your spine and back and neck. I think it can be very helpful for pain management. There have been some studies that have shown that that acupuncture can be helpful in terms of symptoms. And so if that's something that you're into, with acupuncture, I say try it. If it helps, it helps. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But, there's no harm in trying, because I think that a lot of people do find benefit from it, especially with the stiffness of the muscles and pain. In terms of cannabis, again, from a purely scientific point of view, the studies aren't out yet to say definitively one way or another whether there is benefit. There's obviously lots of anecdotal information or case reports of it benefiting. Personally, haven't tried it, but I can't give you a firm answer on that because it's not a personal experience.
Mm-hmm. One option that we can share with our members is that there are a lot of dispensaries out there that actually have trained specialists on staff. And if you walk in and say, I have Parkinson's and my tremor is predominantly on the left and my forearm muscles are always very tight, they may be able to recommend something like a CBD topical. But
right.
Anyway, just my experience.
Yeah. I mean, the only cautionary note I would say is that if it sounds too good to be true, I'm not talking about the CBD, but if something sounds too good to be true, it is. And so don't get, there's a lot of people that swindle, that, prey on people's desperation and will swindle you out of a good amount of money. There's lots of clinics, for instance, that do stem cell treatment, so they speak, that don't do anything except take your money. So I think it's really important for you to sort of do good research and discuss it with your healthcare provider. Does this sound like something that is possible? Is this something I should pursue? Because depending on what that is, they might be able to give you some specific advice.
That's great. Thank you. We have a question from Jodine about dyskinesia. She's asking, what do you think causes dyskinesia? She's gotten no clear answer to the question from several neurologists.
Dyskinesia it's something to be definitely, I mean, that involuntary movement and when it occurs in relation to your medications is actually a very important thing to note down when you're trying to figure out your management, because dyskinesia basically means you've kind of overshot the medication. So you develop a sensitivity to dopamine replacement, and that can happen sometimes. Certain people might be more prone to dyskinesia than others based on their genetics, or it may be that exposure time. So someone who's later in their disease may develop it where they didn't have it initially, and as a response to their dopamine replacement. So when because you're kind of doing this with your dopamine replacement levels throughout the day. So when you're low, that's when you get your off symptoms, right? Like the stiffness and dystonia, for instance, where it's just a prolonged contraction. And then when you're up, sometimes you go a little too high with the dopamine release, and then you can get dyskinetic or those involuntary movements. That's a very fine balance to make. And that's why I was talking about, sometimes the side effects can be worse than the tremor that you're trying to treat or the symptoms you're trying to treat. So dyskinesia is a very good indicator of how you're responding to the dopamine you're taking. And as well, do you need to make any adjustments in your medication based on that? And sometimes that's also a reason to consider DBS for some people, because the dyskinesia can become unmanageable in a lot of ways, and it can be, I mean, very, very uncomfortable, as people know who've experienced it. And sometimes that's a factor that you want to reduce your medications because you're getting too much dyskinesia, and DBS can be a way to do that.
You had mentioned when you were talking about working and sort of starting to think about retiring that you had felt like you were taking too much dopamine. I think you even said dopamine overdose.
Yeah, that's what I called it. It's probably not accurate.
And what did that look like? Was that were you having dyskinesia, or were there other symptoms that you were
I
connecting with that?
I was, but it was actually it was causing me profound amount of fatigue and just feeling general malaise, just feeling really unwell, and dyskinesia for sure. But that was earlier in my disease, so I wasn't as sensitive to the dopamine as I am now. But I was at that point willing to tolerate the side effects because the benefits outweighed the not benefits of taking it.
Right. A minute ago, Sonia, you were talking about your medication regimen and how you take something to counteract the nausea caused by the Cinemet. Two people have chimed in saying, "What is that?"
Yeah, that unfortunately isn't available in the US, and it's domperidone is the medication, but because of its heart effects, it's not available in the US. It is available in Canada from our pharmacies here by a physician here.
Another
But
reason.
there might be something similar that you have in the US. I think the best thing is to ask your movement disorder specialist.
Okay. David asks, we hear very, I think I know the answer to this question, but I'll let you field it. We hear very little about spirituality, and he's not talking about religion per se necessarily,
No.
and its play in Parkinson's treatment. There's not really a question per se, other than, do you have any comments on that?
Absolutely. I mean, whatever your religion is, spirituality, I think is a shared passion for a lot of people, and a shared source of strength for a lot of people. And I mean, for me personally, it is an important part of life for me, because, you know, I subscribe to the fact that, you know, things happen in life for a reason, and I'm okay that this is the path that my life has taken. I wish it didn't, but that's okay. You know, what's the greater meaning of this trajectory that I'm on, and how can I sort of, you know, gain some strength from it and give back to the world in a way that would be helpful. So spirituality, I think, is, and that's the thing about this disease. It's such a pervasive disease, it has global effects, not on you physically only. It has it mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And I think if you find strength in that spiritual source, then that's good for you to do. Again, it's all about what helps you to cope with your disease and what improves your quality of life.
Right, quality of life, and adding that to your team, those two.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So there's a question from Yuki about mannitol. Have you had any experience with mannitol to treat Parkinson's?
No, I have not had any experience with mannitol. I do recall seeing some of the studies, and I don't believe they were conclusive in terms of being helpful. But okay. I don't know enough about it.
And what about probiotics? Someone's asking about a particular probiotic, Solus PS 128, which I'm not familiar with. Yeah. But in general, I mean, I know there is some discussions out there about the you know, Parkinson's originating in the gut.
Yeah.
And a lot of gut health is important. So do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, there is growing body of evidence that there might be that gut-brain axis, that things might start off in the gut and then go up the vagus nerve, which innervates our gut up to the brain. Because sometimes we found, you know, Lewy bodies or amyloid deposits in the gut before actually seeing it in the brain. So there's some strong evidence that's coming through with that. And probiotics, I think, good bacterial kind of growth is an important thing. But I also found for myself, not just taking that into consideration, I do take probiotics, actually, I forgot to say. But I take it because it helps with my gut, basically. You know, constipation is an issue that a lot of us with Parkinson's disease deal with. And for me personally, just through testing and trying out, I do notice a difference when I'm on a probiotic in terms of gut health.
Do you have a particular one that you like?
Not really. They're pretty much the same, really, when you look at the bacterial count. Some have higher bacterial counts than others, but No preference.
Sonia, we talked earlier about how fortunate we are that Parkinson's in the professional workplace has evolved gradually from a negative stigma or something not to be talked about to one that is more open and accommodating, at least in most professional environments. Michelle chimes in after that and says, I wish I had consulted with someone with knowledge about my rights for accommodation at work. So this is not so much a question, but sort of an alert and a heads up to those that are still working today. Maybe they have or haven't talked to their organization about their condition. But it probably would be a good idea to add to your team, like you said earlier, a legal consultant that can give you advice in today's professional occupational workspace around what your accommodations could and should be.
And yes, absolutely, especially when you're working with an organization. And for me, it was a little different because I was self-employed, essentially. But yes, when you're working in an organization, you want to have all your ducks in a row before you go in and discuss it with your higher ups.
Let me do a quick time check here, Monique. We're at about 9 minutes before the top of the hour. We did budget for a 12 o'clock wrap. So let's field one or two more questions, and then I think we'll take 5 minutes to just click through the website so people become familiar with Unshakable MD, which is a terrific site. Do you see any, Monique, that you'd like to lob out?
I'm looking right now. There's still quite a few about diet. Someone's asking about the keto diet. If there's any benefits for that on Parkinson's, and another person's asking about dairy in particular. That giving up meat was fairly easy, but giving up dairy has been pretty challenging.
I hear you. I hear you. That is a challenge.
I have to say, before you answer, let me just put this out there that we have, for those of you who love dairy, we have found some amazing cheese companies that make non-dairy cheese, and one particular that we have a monthly subscription from, and we get these amazing gourmet cheeses. So if anybody's interested in that,
yeah, no, that's absolutely true. I have all three of my daughters are vegan, so we've been through a lot of different cheeses for sure. But the dairy question it's not clear. There have been some studies that show that places in the world that rely on dairy as a good part of their diet may have higher incidence of Parkinson's disease than other cultures that don't have as much reliance on dairy. But these are just sort of epidemiological studies and nothing scientifically, not tested, tried and true. So yeah, the dairy question is still up in the air, but a lot of nutritionists who work with people with Parkinson's do try and cut back on the dairy for that reason, because of the hormonal. So the thing is with Parkinson's disease, it's like genetic loads the gun, but environment often pulls the trigger. So you try and reduce the amount of environmental toxins that you're exposed to. And there is some concern, particularly with regular milk, that there may be some hormonal issues or pesticides that get into the milk. But it's a hard one to kick. It's a hard habit when you're used to drinking milk, but you're right, there are some good substitutes. So I would say just, if you can find a good substitute that you enjoy, then go ahead. But I wouldn't not take dairy unless you're going to, up your calcium and input from another way, because osteoporosis is a real problem.
Great.
Monique, heads up that people are asking what that cheese is, what that non-dairy cheese is.
Okay, I'll put it in the chat.
Okay, let's do one or two more and we'll go to the website. Go ahead.
Okay, so this is an interesting question that's coming in about somebody who's, I take it fairly newly diagnosed and is very interested in joining a support group, but they're nervous about seeing people who have, further along the progression, and it frightens them because they're sort of seeing ahead. This is what I'm, what it's going to look like for me. And so I mean, I can relate to that. I would imagine it
Oh,
would be incredibly challenging. And it goes back to what you were talking about emotional acceptance. So
mhm.
how do you balance sort of wanting to be realistic about what you're going through with also, wanting to be in denial? And that makes it hard to get the support that you need in the support group. You can't be in denial if you're in a support group, but that you need the support.
Right. I mean, first of all, I think when you're talking about support groups, it is important for people to try and find a support group that they can relate to, because it's hard if you're sort of a young onset person with Parkinson's disease to go into an older, necessarily with older community members. It is difficult because your needs and experience are going to be so much different than what they're going through. So that kind of bonding doesn't necessarily always happen, the kind of support that you may need. The one thing is with the fear thing, your journey is your journey is your journey. I used to at one time compare myself to, say, my patients that had Parkinson's and think, oh my God, am I destined for that? But I realized I can only compare myself to myself. My journey is so completely different than your journey, Todd, for instance, or someone else's journey. It's not really comparable. And for me to look at someone else who's farther down the line, that may happen, that may not happen. Our trajectories are going to be different. So finding that, and a lot of support groups are actually great to be online, especially that's what the pandemic has taught us, that a lot of this support can be garnered by online support groups, where you are then exposed to a huge number of people that really may be in your situation. I mean, I belong to women's only Parkinson's groups, young onset parents Parkinson's groups. I mean, there's so much available online as well that you can tap into. But it's only normal and natural. I remember going to the movement disorder clinic for my own checkup and seeing patients that were much older and much farther along in their disease, or younger patients that are much farther along in disease. And it's natural to be scared. It's normal.
Yeah, and like you said at the top of this point, find one that matches your needs.
Mm-hmm.
I can tell you, just to plug PD Active again, we have a standard support group, which is sort of the mid-range of progress, young onset, more advanced stages, support group for more advanced symptoms, caregivers, children of, so pdactive.org, everybody, look for your support group there. Okay, let's branch away. We've got only 3 minutes till the top of the hour, and I'm going to share screen again. And between the two of us, Sonia, let's navigate to what we think folks will be interested in learning about. Unshakable MD. Here is your homepage. Am I right? Yes, Unshakable MD.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. I was going to say, Unshakable MD is sort of my outlet. It's a way for me to sort of put up some educational stuff, which would be under PD education, but also to share my feelings. So that's where I wrote the blogs as well. And on screen now, you'll sort of see, well, there was a couple of children's books that I've read, again, as conversation starters to have with your kids or grandkids. Yeah, those would be under books. So it's really, and you can get in contact with me through this website as well. Send me a message, and I try and respond as much as I can, for sure.
So imagine that writing these books was helpful in sort of your identifying your and coming to peace with your condition with regard to your family, but also probably pretty cathartic. No, it was
exactly that. It was very cathartic writing it with the girls, and just putting into words the experiences that we were having. My grandpa's shaky hands is more for toddlers. It's kind of a cute bedtime story for them, but it brings up the Parkinson's disease in an age appropriate way. But those are two books that were a lot of fun to write. There's some, this hasn't been published. You'll have to forgive this website is kind of always evolving because I'm doing it myself. So it's not as up to date as I would like it to be, but I do write the blogs, and there's links to different things in that. This is clinical trials because I'm such a proponent for participating in whatever way you can. Depending on your wants or needs or abilities, there's a clinical trial for everybody, whether it's just online or whether it's in person and more invasive. So this just talks about clinical trials and what drug development is like and what kind of rights you have as a patient if you were to sign up for a clinical trial, which I think is important for you to know. Types of clinical trials. Again, it's that education piece that we talked about, how it's a very important part of your journey.
Yeah. Terrific. It's a really well designed and organized site.
Thank you.
So we've got that, I think, in our chat window, but it's pretty straightforward at unshakablemd.com. Lots to learn there. Very inspiring story. Your PD story is very inspiring, Sonia. We thank you very, very much for taking, again, time out of your personal weekend to share it with us.
My pleasure. It really was. I wish we could do this in person. That's the only thing I do miss. Seeing people in person, you know, that energy is unfortunately not the same online, but
hard, yeah.
hopefully sometime soon.
Yeah, it's hard. We're going to try to schedule some outdoor events with our group with PD Active in
Oh, that'll be
the
great.
spring months, hoping that other variants stay at bay and allow us to do that. But again, thanks so much, Sonia. We really appreciate learning about your work and your inspiring sort of pivot from age 27 to where you are today. So thank you for doing that for us. And thank you for being here today.
No problem. My pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity to talk.
Great. Again, this has been recorded, everyone. It is on our YouTube channel, the PD Active YouTube channel. Since we're about to terminate the session, if it hasn't been put in the chat window yet, we'll send it out with a follow-up email to everyone that's attended. Otherwise, we hope you all have a wonderful day. Take good care.
We'll include the cheese company in the follow-up email in case you missed it in the chat. And we had so many questions. Thank you so much. This has been great. We were worried we weren't going to have enough questions, but
Oh yeah, we didn't get to a lot of them. So for that, we apologize, but we covered as many as we could.
Thank you, Sonia.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye. Take care.
Bye.